Hey, so, hang on. Better? The thing on? Yeah, not professional. Very clearly, not cool. In no way is this a thing a lot of people are watching, and that's fine because we're just grinders, right? I just wanted to make some quick videos. I was planning to do a podcast a week on breakout and hit rates like I did last week, but I got a really cool guest to come on next week, or he got himself to come on. It's really confusing. And I was like, I don't want to wait 2 weeks. You know, the season's not far away. SBF, Scott Fishbowl, draft soon. It's kind of information I want out the way. So let's talk about hit rates. Hit rates at wide receiver specifically, and then I'm going to do running back, tight end. It's just easier to separate them out this way. Let's talk about them, and then I'm going to tell you about a way that I've been looking for breakout candidates, slightly different, and just makes more sense to me, and maybe it will you too, you know? So what is a breakout? For a start, all these numbers are different no matter how many times I see them or who's posting them. There's slightly different numbers, and it's for a variety of reasons. One, it's since when? I'm using since 2007, but what I've been about since 2009 or 2000 itself. I use 2007 as a generic cutoff line because I see changes in the passing offense around 2007. We've seen subsequent changes, but 2007 is one of the big ones, I think, specifically in terms of trends and who's getting the most targets. But that's all boring stuff. The other thing is what you count as a breakout. So real quick, wide receivers, the first year they have a top 24 season, PPR scoring by the end of the year, not per game, because I don't find it helps much with breakouts anyway. And the first year they do that, if they're in their first year, their second year, their third year, that's their breakout year, right? All right, so let's take a quick look at that. Players drafted in the first round, so this is draft round, and this is career year. Breakout in general, in the first round, they break out 47% of the time. That's a typical hit rate or draft round hit rate, as I'm calling it, that you'll see for wide receivers drafted in the first round, again, since 2007. So it's fairly strong. Draft capital matters. It drops off fairly quickly and really ends at round 3 because of the number of players that really it's because there's just more players being drafted, undrafted 4th round, 5th round, 6th round that don't hit. But also there's just more players to sift through to try and find the good ones. So ignoring that for a second, what does this 47% mean? For when you're looking for a breakout candidate in 2020, do you just continue to hope for all first round picks? Well, in some ways, yes, especially if they have a good college profile. But it's worth noting that not doing well in your rookie year or your sophomore, the earlier you do something impressive or stand out in volume or performance or fantasy points, honestly, the larger your ceiling is. Now, Deandre Hopkins didn't break out in year 1, so it's not like you can't hit an amazing season or amazing ceiling by not breaking out in year 1 or not crossing significant thresholds like in target share. But it is true that the earlier you see it, the more confident you can feel it. And honestly, the best group of wide receivers, if you were to take all breakouts from year 1, year 2, or year 3, these guys, these nine, so you have the same number of breakouts, or these 2 guys from round 3, and then you went all the way back to 2000, and I've done this, and you look at the different groups, you really want, if you had to pick one of those groups, even if we equalize the numbers in each group, you really want that first group. That's where the most amazing dynasty studry comes from. Antonio Brown is an exception, but if you want Julio, Calvin Johnson, so on and so forth, you really want career year 1 breakouts. Now, again, year 2 breakouts are phenomenal. You want those guys too. I mean, even Keenan Allen fits in this first year. But anyway, it's worth remembering background knowledge that these guys who break out in year 1 are more important. And luckily for us, about 40% of first-round wide receivers actually break out in year 1. About 40% since 2007 have broken out year 2. Year 3 becomes significantly lower. And if we look at this across draft capital, that trend remains true. Year 2 is the most likely. Year 3 is more likely than year 1 once we take all different draft capitals into consideration. But in general, round 1, especially within the same draft round, is just as likely as round 2. So that's worth knowing as well. But none of this, again, really ever helps me understand who do I want to go trade for, bet on in the next season. I mean, it's not like it's not useful, but it's a little bit snake oil because we're not talking about likely here. We're just talking about the numbers who have done it. They were all very different players. That's the one notable thing about players that break out in fantasy or in real football. They're all incredibly different. That's why there are thresholds for size and athleticism. But if you discount a player entirely because of it, or draft capital for that matter, then you miss out on, like, Deandre Hopkins had terrible athleticism as measured at the combine. Keenan Allen had bad draft capital and terrible athleticism at the combine. Odell Beckham was too short. Antonio Brown was a 6th-round pick and too short. Like, you know it, but you should never draw strict lines. I mean, all of these guys literally physically look very different. And they come from different rounds in the draft. If you want to hit on all of them, none of them can be permanent lines. So it's helpful. It's interesting background information. All of this is, but without considering something about the player, you're kind of at a loss for thinking about the next season. However, I do think there's a way they can help us out just a little bit more than they do right now. And that's by thinking in terms of most common instead of most likely or most often. All right, so let me show you what I'm talking about here. Instead of thinking about the number of players that break out in the first year in that draft capital, how often does that 40% happen, or those 9 players? What percentage of breakouts at the wide receiver position do those 9 players in year 1 from the first round actually account for since 2007? And that gives us a slightly different look at who's more likely to break out this coming season if we apply it to players. So what's the most common instead of what's the most likely, what's the highest rate? Like, what happens the most often? Not always. AJ Brown breaks this trend, for example. Second-year player, he's not. That's not the most common year 1 breakout, as you'll see. But who is the most common? That's what I've been looking at this through. All right, so let's take a look at that. If you take all the positional hits at wide receiver since 2007 and look at the number of players, in this case it's 9 and 9, like we know, from the first round in their first career year, if 9 players did it, that accounts for 11% of all breakout seasons since 2007. So the most common breakout at the wide receiver position, players to finish for the first time in the top 24, is actually a player drafted in round 1, playing in their first season. The second most likely, well, actually, the top 3 are all as likely. They have the same number of players to do it. So players drafted in round 1, playing in year 1 or 2. So both are as common in an individual season. And players drafted in round 2, playing in their second year, are also just as common. So essentially, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Reagor, all these players drafted in round 1 this year, they're as likely to break into the top 24 for the first time as a player entering his second year in 2020, but was drafted in the second round last year. We're thinking of DK Metcalf here. And you can see that this rates all of them, different draft capitals in different years. They're all very unlikely. Like, the highest hit rate we get is 11%. 11% of all hits are accounted for by these 2 conditions, right? Now, we can also apply that to 2020 players in general. Like, that's cool, but I can't remember who was drafted 3rd overall, and this is his 4th year, right? So what I did is I applied this stuff to my projections for 2020, actually, because that has career year, it has draft capital, and we can just bring it in and see where the high numbers are, right? I thought that'd be interesting to do, and so I did it. Now, the obvious initial answer is that players drafted in round 1, going into their first season, Justin Jefferson, Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, Harry Ruggs, I forget which is right. Jalen Reagor, Brandon Ayuk, all of these guys are in the most common type of breakout season. That doesn't mean something about them tells us they're going to break out, because we have no NFL data. If you want to break into what I think of them on a college level, I mean, like less than 20,000 videos, podcasts. I mean, my whole database pinned to my Twitter timeline or Patreon, all free, has their college profiles and what I think of them, and also my ranks of how I rank them. But it's about what you think, right? This is the most common type of breakout to happen. Well, one of three common. So let's take out the rookies, because we know their names, and we already feel like how unlikely it is for a rookie to break into the top 24 for the first time, right? So let's just take out those playing in their first year and look for those players playing in year two. Players playing in year two with first-round draft capital include Marcus Brown and N'Keal Harry. Deebo Samuels and DK Metcalf happen at about the same rate, as well as Paris Campbell, McCall Hardman, Andy Isabella, and JJ Sega-Whiteside. This doesn't mean those players in particular are any more or less likely to break out than each other. But since 2000, this is a type of condition, draft round in the first or second year and playing in their second season, that happens the most often. It's the most common type of breakout. Next, we see Christian Kirk, Anthony Miller, James Washington, Dante Pettis, and Terry McLaurin coming up. And notice they're less common, but still, when we're considering the highest is 11, 7 to 6% of breakouts being accounted for by players just with these two almost arbitrary conditions, career year and draft capital applied to them, is interesting. So what I did to go a little bit further, you can't see this, it's tiny. But I was just wondering, and I looked at my breakout player list. I was like, what did players do the year before they broke out, right? I've talked before extensively about how 10% is a really significant number for a rookie, just in terms of raw volume, raw target share, right? In my vacated targets article, I also talked about the fact that stability was actually the most common situation for a breakout. So I started to look at vacated targets. That's what VT stands for here. But just looking on a simple level, how much volume they got in year one, we see that the average breakout across all career years gets about 14% of the target share. And I've told you, and you can listen and look at those videos if you want, about how 10% is a significant number as well. So that brings us back to this list. And remembering that rookies entering their first year with first-round draft capital are also the most common breakout. So all of them accounted for, but we don't have any other factor we can apply to them unless we want to go back to college. And that college data really doesn't work well as a timer. Like being X productive doesn't mean you're more likely to break in year 1, 2, or 3. I've tried to look for that. I don't find it. But with NFL stats, they get slightly more predictive. Efficiency, for one thing. We could look at this through an efficiency lens as well. Players who are efficient, for example, Blair Andrews at RotoViz has shown consistently over the last 2 years that a running back and wide receiver, players who are efficient with even a certain amount of volume, not nothing, not one touch you scored a touchdown, but like over 50 expected fantasy points, over 10% target share, and you're efficient, that's more likely to incline a team to give you more opportunity the following year. So that's one way that he's looking at it. And I think that's really interesting too, and something that could be applied to this. But just looking at volume, because we already know it's significant and it's easy and it makes sense. Who had over, let's do a 10% threshold. We see that N'Keal Harry, and this is what I've been saying, despite loving his college profile, so I will keep betting on it, but I'm no longer buying, he only got 4% of the targets last year, and this is not better if you go per game. He was, however, efficient, if we want to use Blair Andrews' research, but I advise you read his work to see how efficient you need to be and in what way to actually, make it matter. So let's just take out everyone who didn't get over 10% of the targets. So that's not even the 14%, which is the average the year before a breakout across all draft capitals that I was talking about. So we're lowering the threshold a little bit, just to be fair. And what we get is a list like this. And across here, you see the breakout rate, how often breakouts happen in this career year. So 40% of breakouts from round 1 happen in year 2. The draft round hit rate, so 47% of people drafted in this round actually hit. And so it adds some extra context, I think, or it's adding it for me. So what we see at the top of the list is if we just use a simple volume threshold of 10%, here's the most likely or most common breakout candidates for 2020. These are the people that I think fit the criteria of the most common type of breakout we're most likely to see. From there, you go through player evaluation. And do you really, seriously want my player evaluation? Because I'll give it to you. I do it on podcasts. I do it all the time. But from here, like, what do you think is kind of more important for you? I mean, this is where you get to have fun. Okay, I understand the landscape. I understand what happens most often. And I really like this guy, and he's in this group. Okay, then that's who you draft. But since everyone's ranks and to be told, and it somehow seems like it's not the end of the conversation, I'll point them out. I really like Marcus Brown. 17% of the target share on a great team that's suddenly, blown up, not to just be a well-managed team, but an incredibly fantasy productive team. Based on his draft cost, everyone's basically forgotten about him, and he's drafted in the first round with the highest breakout rate in his higher breakout year, or as common a breakout year as he can have. And this is literally the most common type of breakout we see. And he crossed a very simple volume threshold. Marcus Brown kind of looks like a great buy candidate right now. He has a reasonable floor on a great team with good skills and good speed. If nothing else, you're not getting nothing out of him for the next 3 years. He's going to be somewhat productive. And he may have his first top 24 season next year, where you see dynasty value grow exponentially. And I'm primarily talking about dynasty, that's fair. Deebo Samuels, obviously he's got a foot injury. We don't know how much time he's going to matter, but this is why I also started to investigate trying to buy some Deebo Samuels. DK Metcalf may be the forgotten man last year. And let's not forget he has the most significant volume of players that didn't break out in their first year in 2019, and yet were incredibly impressive. Like I see a lack of, and I'm not a DK. I find it hard to be a DK guy because I'm a big Tyler Lockett guy, but like 20% of targets last year, incredibly efficient, no matter how you want to look at it, with all the volume you could want, the great quarterback on a team that doesn't throw, but that's true for Marcus Brown. That's true for AJ Brown too. Like there's just green lights for DK Metcalf right now, despite my Tyler Lockett love, who I also think is slightly undervalued. Christian Kirk, I had a talk with him recently via Twitter, so I don't know how much of a talk that is, but Rich Harbaugh was saying that his targets are less, I think overall what he was saying is they're less desirable because they're just lower ADOT targets. But Christian Kirk has broke the average for volume based on career year. Every year of his career, he's continued to increase his role on this team, and he's been efficient, and he's already got a significant volume threshold, so there's a really safe floor there. And this is the second most common situation for a wide receiver to break out in an individual year. A second-round player going into their third year. That happens pretty much about 8% of breakouts of that type of player. So I like him a lot more than Anthony Miller and James Washington going into that threshold. But it's also interesting that Miller and James Washington, two players, I think Miller's got a lot of buzz. His ADP seems really fair and also really high for anyone just looking for like a sleeper breakout. But James Washington also crosses the threshold. And same as Christian Kirk and Anthony Miller, just as common a breakout. So like, I want to go check that I still have some shares of James Washington in some places. Terry McLaurin actually is a less common type of breakout than everyone I've mentioned so far, but is rightly valued right now as a first-year player that did really well and was really efficient and had 20% of the targets. It just gives me some perspective that this happens less often, not a lot less often. It's 6% versus 8% or 6.5% versus 7.9%. But it's still interesting context when you consider how little James Washington is valued. And I do think Terry McLaurin can be valued over these guys. To go back to Rich Harbaugh's point, he's playing a role that is more rare and typically has more fantasy value. But it is interesting these guys represent a more common type of breakout going into 2020. Deante Johnson, like everyone knows about him. I do think Juju is going to bounce back, though, and I don't know what that means for him. But this does mean he definitely belongs where he is in the minds of the fantasy community right now. Preston Williams might be getting a little forgotten because Devontae Parker's likely to maintain that role now. And where he's undrafted, you might think it's less likely. I typically point out that teams fade draft capital because they're draft capital snobs. But it's not that much of an uncommon breakout, even though it only happens 2% of the time. In this career year, of the very few that have done it, there's an incredibly high hit rate of it happening in the second year. There's only like 4 or 5 who've ever done it, and that's why. But it does also account for like 5% of all breakout wide receivers in an individual season. If we consider all seasons since 2007, single season, like 5% of those breakouts were undrafted free agents going into their second year. So it's definitely not worth forgetting Preston Williams. On the other hand, Steve Sims, like I have no interest in at all. I'm not overly impressed with the 12% he got because he didn't do much with it. I might be wrong. I would rather have Antonio Golden Gandy on there, for example, in Washington, or Terry McLaurin. But still, I mean, you've got a very deep roster of Steve Sims on waiver wire. Like, I don't hate it, but like I have no value. I have no opinion of that player, so he just gets pushed down. All right, so I just think it creates an interesting list. It tells you nothing about the players. You have to break it down with an understanding of who they were in college, who they've been in the NFL, so on and so forth. Like, I have a lot of hope for Mike Williams and Corey Davis as players based on what they've done. 16% of target share last year. But it's a very uncommon breakout. It's very uncommon that players from the first round break out in year 4. You're basically looking at Devontae Parker here, still giving them hope. So it puts it in context. Doesn't mean you can't. I'm telling you to stop liking either of those players, or Will Fuller, who's a very unusual player in himself. It's a very particular individual situation. To evaluate a player, you have to recognize they're all uniquely different, all breakouts, and incredibly different, no matter how you want to look at it. And there's very little commonality. But I do think looking at most common breakout provides better context than thinking about draft capital hit rates or draft round hit rates or career year hit rates with my breakout rate. Like, all of it together tells a story, and then you get to just like the players that you like. And for me, that's been an interesting way of doing it. I hope you find it interesting too. You can find this data, all data. We can find my projections actually on Player Profiler. You can find all my data on Patreon, on Twitter, which is free, but I do accept support as, someone who likes being supported, I guess. You find all those links down below. Appreciate if you check that out and stayed even for 5 minutes, let alone get to the end here. Sorry, I'm not professional, but I completely refuse to be a YouTube professional. I don't plug my mic in before I come on. I don't have a sign off, and you're about to listen to absolutely no theme song. Sorry, I guess. But hopefully the information's useful. Thank you. Bye.